Hello, everyone. My name is Taliesin.
And I'm Evitel.
Welcome to the Living Illustration panel, where we're going to be talking to Blizzard animators and directors of cinematics of the a very special sort. We were looking at CGI cinematics mostly yesterday, and today we're going to be talking about the motion stories, which we touched on a little bit, but we're going to have to find out a little bit more about. But before we do any of that, can we introduce ourselves, perhaps, going around this beautiful call, starting with Brian?
Sure. I'm Brian Horn. I'm the Cinematics Director Supervisor. And I directed most recently, I did a bunch of Hearthstones back in the past, and most recently I did the Maldraxxus piece for the Shadowlands Afterlives that we put out.
And Dennis?
Yeah, I'm Dennis Brado. I'm the Visual Development Supervisor. So we do concept for all the pre-render cinematics as well as the illustration work for key art and these motion story pieces we're going to talk about today.
And Anna?
Hi, I'm Anna Morgan, Cinematic Director for the Hearthstone trailers.
And Doug?
Hey, I'm Doug Gregory. I've been directing here at Blizzard for about 10 years, something along those lines, and mostly worked on the 2.5D shorts, starting with Xiaohao, all the way up through the more recent Warbringers pieces, and just recently completed the Diablo 4 announcement cinematic 4x3 Day will come.
And Jeremiah?
Hi, I'm Jeremiah Johnson. I've been with Blizzard for nearly 18 years now. And since I've been directing here, it's been mostly Hearthstone and Overwatch stuff. A lot of Hearthstone stuff, fair amount of Overwatch stuff now.
And Matthew?
Hello, I'm Matthew Mead. I am the supervisor of the motion story department. So I oversee the department that creates all the motion story shorts.
Terrific. I, for one, very excited by how much we just heard the word Hearthstone being said, because it's a game that we didn't touch on at all in our last panel, and I feel like this one might be quite Hearthstone-centric.
I hope so.
So first of all, it would be great to get a sort of an explanation as to what these motion stories are. How would you describe them, and how they're different from other kind of cinematics that people might direct at Blizzard? I suppose Matthew's probably the ideal candidate for that.
I think talking about Hearthstone, that's kind of the origin of these pieces was, it was about 5 or 6 years ago, and kind of the birth of Hearthstone was started, and they were looking for ways to tell their stories within the game, and actually apart from the game too. And so previous to that, all that we really had in the cinematics department was the fancy pre-rendered pieces. So the big budget, super fancy, everything's modeled out, and lots of special effects. And it was about the same time that the overseeing management of Blizzard had said, we need to tell more stories. How do we tell more stories within Blizzard? And so the idea was, how can we tell these Hearthstone stories? What can we show for Hearthstone? All we have really is this card artwork to, this incredible card artwork to show off. So previous to that, I had been trying to pitch the idea of creating a department that would create cinematics out of these 2D pieces of artwork. And so I pitched it for years, and then all of a sudden, Jeff Chamberlain, our big boss, came to me and said, "I want you to give it a go. I want you to have a try with this." And so that was kind of the birth of the Hearthstone 2.5D pieces. But also at the same time, Doug had been working on kind of parallel on 2.5D pieces as well. So if Doug, you could talk about that.
Sure. Yeah, as I mentioned to you guys yesterday during our other cinematics talk, at least on our side of the street, I was part of a division at that time called Creative Development, and we housed the illustration team that did all the big splash images that you've seen all around Blizzard for like the last 20 years, I guess. That was its own department. But we also kind of housed licensing in that area as well, and marketing and things of that nature, and our publishing division. And so we'd be working on things simultaneously with the game teams, trying to figure out other ways to carry the message of story out to the world from gaming. So we weren't the cinematics crew. We're the people doing the comics and the novels and just making cool shorts and things of that nature. But it was all meant to be more of the paper-based media for the most part. But one day we were actually called into a meeting to check out this video that Dave Kosak, who was then the kind of the creative director, I think at the time, on the Mists of Pandaria, certainly head of story at that time. And he had, I guess, done like a kind of fireside chat with all of the WoW team huddled together, and he kind of played Lore Walker Cho to that group, and I mean, including like staff and outfit and everything like that, and basically told the burdens of Shahau, basically told the history of Pandaria to that group. And we watched that as outside of that as a video, just kind of trying to drum up ideas for marketing and things of that nature. And I came away from it and asked my boss, I was like, man, that was so cool. And Dave, if you haven't heard him tell a story, he is he gets you there, man. He just puts you in that volume, in that place. And so when I heard that, I was like, man, we should just take that and animate it, make a cartoon out of it. That would be cool. And I pitched that idea to Chris Metzen, and Metzen basically said, well, what can you do for $1,000? I had no idea what I could do, but I figured I'd go back to my desk and give it a shot. So basically, I took the $1,000 budget that I had to kind of spend against just trying to generate a rough idea of what we could do towards that end, having no experience in animation or directing at all, and sat there with an artist named Laurel Austin. And between she and I and a freelancer by the name of Rob Haynes, we worked on a little tiny piece, which wound up being the first episode of The Burdens of Shahau. That was kind of just the proof of concept. And once Metzen saw that, he kind of just said, all right, we're going to put you in touch with the editorial department. And Brian Horn actually was the original editor on The Burdens of Shahau. And that we're off to the races.
Amazing. Yeah, it's incredible how these things that kind of span multiple departments now and has this like huge life starts from, someone dressing up in costume, right? And inspiring a group of people to do something. So could you guys explain a little bit, like what exactly is motion story, like technically, and how is it different from other types of animation?
Sure. So I'll jump in for that.
Go ahead.
So motion story, we interchange like the term motion story and 2.5D. So we may switch quite a bit in those, but it's basically the same thing.
I love the term 2.5D, by the way.
Yeah,
I'm totally here for it.
We use 3D cameras, we use some 3D geometry, but it's still 2D artwork. And so it's not fully animated 3D, we can't move a camera all the way around. It's sort of like a diorama that's set up, and we can move a camera a little bit so you get these cool parallaxing moments and it feels alive, but it doesn't quite, you can't fly through it the same way you would, a normal 3D scene. So for the most part, these pieces allow us to tell longer stories, more stories, because it's more cost effective, but also it really showcases the art. And I think Blizzard is so art heavy and so art focused that a lot of our IPs really come to life in their full, true form when we're using, when we're showing the illustrations. So that's our way of kind of blending things together and telling these stories. And they have their own challenges and, their own constraints to the art that you wouldn't get from, like, say, a fully 3D animated piece or something. There's advantages and disadvantages. So.
Yeah, I mean, it often feels, and we'll see examples of these as we discuss them as we go on, but I always think that they're a great example of the essence of whatever franchise that they're being made for, kind of really distilled to their core, because they can be so much more stylized and really kind of explore things that a more conventional cinematic might not be able to. And with that in mind, how do you determine what should be a motion story against, say, a cinematic trailer or an in-game cutscene or something like that? What's the decision process there?
I can take that if you want. Yeah, at least for Lords of War, I think what happened was there was all these stories, background stories that they were going to want to tell about those warlords that they weren't going to actually be able to get to in the game. So when they came to the creative development department, and by then I think we'd kind of been absorbed into the cinematics department because of the success of Shao Hao, and for some other reasons. I think they just saw the opportunity to, there's a whole lot of story we'd love to get out there about these warlords to really make them fearful. By the time you get in the game, you already wanted to have a sense of history by the time you hit, enter, so to speak. And 2.5D was a great way to do that. We could tell 5 stories, which cinematically, if we were to do that with pre-renders, would be incredibly time consuming and cost prohibitive. You would never be able to get that out. But roughly, I think within about 1.5 years, we were able to take care of the 5 pieces that we did for Warlords of Draenor. So that's how it came about, at least for that second set.
So is it always a volume thing, or is it ever a case of this is something that we wouldn't be able to tell sort of any other way?
I think it's also a creative ideas too. If you look at the Hearthstone pieces, Hearthstone is based on 2D card artwork. So I think it was the logical choice in that case to say, hey, how can we reuse this artwork? What can we create from this artwork? So it's not too far removed from the 2D artwork. So I think it's always been with Hearthstone of like, hey, let's keep to our roots of this original 2D artwork and see what we can create from that.
And of course, we have seen a vast swathe of different Blizzard games having the motion story treatment. Just remind me as we go around, because I'm sure you've worked on all different ones again, which franchises have actually sort of had motion stories attached to them by now? Hearthstone is the obvious one.
Sure, yeah, Hearthstone, World of Warcraft.
Overwatch.
Yeah.
Overwatch, yeah. So
and I did StarCraft Reclamation as well in motion story.
Yeah. So
we had a brief stint with Heroes of the Storm too. We did the title cards for that.
For Diablo, we would do these parchment. This almost like a moving sketch, or with like it was done with a quill pen or something.
Mm-hmm.
I think on Overwatch we do it for when we introduce the hero's backstory.
The origin stories.
Yeah.
They have a slightly different look. They're not based in card art or anything, and only like a few people actually get to illustrate those. Yeah, they just have a different look and feel, how we deal with effects, how we deal with depth. It's traditionally been a little bit different, although in some of the latest ones, I feel like where those lines are starting to blur a little bit. Doug did a piece that had so much depth in it, and the camera it was the Echo origin piece that I just thought was incredible. That I feel like really pushed.
Matthew Mead on that one. He's the one that made that happen. I asked for something I thought was ridiculous, and he said, "I think I can do that," as Matthew is wont to do.
I've been hearing that a lot about Matthew lately, and I'm feeling a little cheated, Matthew.
Oh,
feeling a little cheated.
Hey, I gave you like falling floors and
you did.
Psychotic. Yeah.
You did. I should say I'm just spoiled. I'm spoiled by you.
Worth mentioning as well that Neskane has been doing the art on most of those, who's a phenomenal artist.
Yep.
Yeah, I think one thing I think is interesting, JJ, for the Sigma piece was sort of the constraints you had and how you made that piece from it.
Yeah, so I think before the Sigma piece, the smallest number of shots that we had for one of those was like maybe 6 to 8 shots or something like that, which basically means you get like 6 to 8 paintings, and then you break those paintings apart, and you apply the 2.5D treatment to it. But for that show, we were really, really short on time, and it was very high concept. And so, I had this crazy idea. I pitched it to my editor and then to the team, and it was just a huge trust fall. Like everyone was like, "I think I understand what you're saying. All right, let's go for it." And Sigma's origin piece turned out to be apparently a fan favorite among a lot of the origin pieces. So we did that with 4 paintings, and then we just kind of remixed them to turn 4 paintings into like 12 shots or something like that.
I think that's actually an important point you brought up too, of the importance of the director-editor relationship too at the start of the project, just because of the there are limitations to this process. And so getting that initial animatic out there and working, I think is kind of vital for the whole process, just to see where the limitations are, how it's going to work out, and how, you know, just kind of the emotional response you get from it, because you can, I mean, it's just a vital part of the process.
I also think like limitations of time or resources or budget sometimes are a creative spark, right? Like initially it feels like a hurdle, but I think so often if you got everything that you wanted, of course that would be fantastic, but when does that ever happen? But sometimes it's those limitations that really force you to be creative about how to tell the story. And I think with all of our motion story directors and teams, there's so much creative contribution and ways of overcoming some of those challenges that actually, I think, help us move the art form forward. And to me, that's been one of the most exciting things to observe in the process.
Yeah, I like to think of the Hearthstone motion story as a puzzle with rhythm. So, you know, you have your 8 shots that you get, you know, and that's part of the puzzle. And how do you make that feel and climax and build the song to that? And then, like, for example, like Dark Moon Fair, the roller coaster ride, right?
Shadows dancing, bounding leaves, swinging up the thing that's leaves.
It's like, okay, well now there's the micro puzzle of just that shot and the thousands of layers that go into making something like that. And it's like, okay, well, how do we tell the story? We know the song's this long, this is part of the puzzle piece. And okay, well, I know that I want it to be a roller coaster ride. Cool, well, we need to keep it interesting for this long. How many pieces do we need? Okay, well, what's in a roller coaster? We need lights, maybe some characters coming at the screen, you know, and then I was like, you know, we probably want like a false climax so that when you see the giant old god at the end, you're like, whoa, that was really awesome. So like, let's get some eyes in there. So you kind of build that in the animatic. And then when you go through the next process of illustration and going to motion story, then that motion story artist has to take thousands of layers because it's not 3D, right? It's painted. So like there's lit and unlit states, there's motion, there's movement. And it's just like, it's like this feast of like, okay, how complicated can I make this? But like, and stay interesting, but stay to the rhythm of the show. It's just like, oh, I get excited, obviously.
Just like the director to say, how complicated can I make this?
Exactly. And then there's people like Matthew who, you know, just like they see those, I feel like it's like kind of the Matrix where they see the puzzle pieces and then go, oh yes, I know what to do.
It is. Awesome. I've been working with it so long now that I kind of know in my head the limitations. So when we sit down at the pitch meeting with the directors and they say, hey, I'm thinking of this, I have an idea of where we can take it. And that's been one of the wonderful things about the process too, is when we started off, there was pretty much no animation. It was just a camera rotating around a character, you know, a little, you know, a little montage scene. And so as we've gone through the process and as, you know, the directors have learned the limitations and as I've learned the limitations, I've also learned, you know, where we can push it, where we can actually like what we can get away with and what we can't get away with. So it's been a really, really cool adventure. So every time I sit down with a director, it becomes a new adventure of like, okay, let's see what fun new stuff we can do here. And it's been super rewarding. So, and it's like Dennis said, it's sometimes it's the tight deadlines, the tight turnarounds that sometimes like spark the creativity of like, hey, how about we try this? And it's also giving the artists in the department too kind of a little creative freedom too to try something out. And you know, the directors are all, you know, incredible in the process as well of like saying, you know, wow, this is great, and you know, accepting, you know, these you know, these creative challenges. So I think it's super fun. I've been at Blizzard for more than 20 years now, and this is kind of the most creative part of that whole 20 years that I've been involved in. Is this, you know, it's right now is pushing this medium, seeing what we can get away with. So I still enjoy coming to work or staying at home every day, I guess. working on this stuff every day. So working with such, you know, creative people. So quite
It's really
wonderful.
interesting to me to hear you talk about the kind of creativity that comes out of having sort of extra confines of the motion stories, because it's startling to me when I think back to all the ones that I've seen. They always seem amazing to me in that they seem like their own thing, even the ones that are part of a series. Very much they seem to work as standalone stylistically as well. They all have their own kind of purpose in a way that maybe sort of in-game cinematics and trailers don't so much. They seem that much more individual, and I always assumed that came out of maybe a certain freedom that having the kind of drawn out style sort of brought with it. Would you say there are maybe beyond the confines, there are also sometimes ways that you can be more creative with the form than you might be able to with other ones?
I think if I can jump in, I think like Hearthstone, just to speak to that, intentionally each time they put something new out, it's like, hey, we were going in this direction, let's make a 90 or 180 degree turn and let's go in this direction, and it's meant to be very different and you want it to feel very different. And I know that I think I can probably speak for the room. I think we hate repeating ourselves and we love looking for new challenges. I know Matthew just threw a lot of great praise towards the directors a few minutes ago, but I have to say, like, when cooking up these ideas, linking up with his group is like a #1 priority for me, because that motion story group brings so many great ideas. And also, like, you know, I'd been doing the Hearthstone stuff for a long time, like a lot of those 2.5D shows, and I'm still blown away. Like when I see other directors work with motion story, I'm like, I didn't know they could do that. Like, crap, I would have asked for that. And that's, you know, what I jokingly, you know, saying to Matthew, like, I'm always blown away by what he and his team bring to this, because it's like you might have an idea and it's like, well, I'll pitch it, but I don't know if it's going to work because I don't know if we can do that. And Matthew's usually like, I think we can make that work, you know, and they always pull it off. So yeah, for Hearthstone, it's very intentional to be different each time.
And it also goes back into the illustration too, because we'll come up with a good idea, like we could do it this way, but what that requires is something different from how we illustrate it. So it's pretty interesting how we have to kind of like think way far. I mean, I guess we do with everything, but we have to think way far ahead and sort of backtrack to how, you know, how we're going to build it. So some of the illustrations, for instance, you'll see like a painting is very similar, but a character may have different expressions. I mean, that's a very simple example, but that's something we kind of have to build into how many illustrations we're going to do, the workload for the illustrator, you know, things like that. And usually what works really well is when we have a good collaboration with the illustration team and Matthew's team, you know.
Yeah, I think to jump into that for a second, I think Dennis can expand on it even more. I think the learning curve for these pieces is super steep, as we learned from Xiaohao all the way up to, you know, the most recent pieces we've done. And it's taken a long time to kind of get a pipeline in place that's responsible to each one of those steps, because you aren't just talking about 5 paintings or 12 paintings. You might be talking about 5 paintings, but hundreds of state changes. And those, for the artist, the freelancer that's going to have to do them, they need to be cool with doing those kind of things, or at least know that that's coming, you know, because that can be quite a bit. And then you're also talking about having to think about expressions changing and how to get to those expressions and what you're going to A and B those poses and everything. So I know that for Laurel and I, it took a long time to help people understand that, yeah, you might only have 30 shots or 30 paintings, but each shot is made up of so many micro components that you're chasing down throughout the whole process. And then they have to be layered a specific way to be handed over to Matthew, so that when he ingests them, he knows what you meant and everything's not just flattened, or that eyebrow isn't flattened to the face, but the other eyebrow that needs to move is still on a layer that you can turn on and off. There's a lot of moving parts for sure.
And I'm not alone in thinking that the facial expressions in the Warcraft ones in particular are one of the most stunning sort of components of them. They really sort of bring something out of them. But just to go back to Hearthstone for a second, another really important part, which we haven't discussed really so far of those particular stories, is of course the music, which has been a central part of those since the very, very beginning. How did that sort of evolve? How was that decided that it was going to be a song basically for each one?
I also have to know, is it what comes first? Is it the song or the animation, or is it this kind of like magical alchemy where they kind of both come into being together?
So I guess I'll take this one. So the songs usually come first, and I feel like how songs became a part of Hearthstone, and I think how I lost all fear in terms of presenting or pitching kind of go hand in hand. So you may or may not have heard of this guy called Chris Metzen, very larger than life sort of personality at Blizzard Entertainment for many, many years. So this was when Hearthstone was really, really new. If we can go back down memory lane for a second, the first one was very, very epic, right? Like it's talking about what war is, it's about deception and all these things, and just super epic narration.
Wars are only won upon the anvil of honor.
The next one was Curse of Naxxramas, and we were in this cadence of release and then adventure, and then we do expansion and then adventure, expansion, adventure, and that was the cycle for a while. So when we came up to the first full expansion, which was Goblins and Gnomes, I had this crazy idea that it should be a song.
Goblins and gnomes, goblins and gnomes, both are super brilliant, but you would never know.
And so I remember going to, well, I pitched it internally to the guys on our side of the street, our leadership on our side of the street, and they were like, all right, it's kind of crazy, but go pitch it to Chris and see what he thinks. So they sent me all on my lonesome. I don't know if anyone wanted to stand by me while I did this or not, but they sent me across the street, and I remember making an appointment with Chris. He knew I was going to pitch him something for Hearthstone. I walked into his office, and he just had this, at the time he had this huge office, and his desk was all the way in the back of the room. Around the periphery with like all these huge epic, you know, sculptures from movies and video games and everything else, comic books. And then he had like a lounge area in the front, and it just felt like, I mean, it just felt like the Coliseum, right? Like it was just, it felt huge because I was so nervous, right? So I go in and I'm like, hey, Chris, I got an idea for the next Hearthstone expansion. And this is, you know, we're very precious about this because this is a new game for us at the time, right? This is only our first expansion. And so he walks from the back of his office all the way to the front lounge area, sits down in his chair, and he's like, all right, let me hear it. And I'm like, all right, it's a little bit different. Just bear with me. And I jump into it and I start singing, you know, full on, just like Goblins and Gnomes, right? And I get about that far, and Chris puts his face down into his hands, and I'm thinking, I'm done. I'm not directing anything else here ever again. But recently I'd taken this, Blizzard had brought in this pitching coach, and the coach had two pieces of advice, and I clung to those pieces of advice for dear life. They said, no matter what you're pitching, commit to it 100%. And no matter what happens, don't stop. And so when his hands went into his head, it was the longest, like 45, you know, so seconds of my life where I'm singing to this grown man, this Chris, you know, again, it's Chris Metzen. And I get through the song, and then it felt like, you know, 2 years passed by. It was probably, I don't know, like 10 seconds or something. But Chris lifts his face out of his hands and he's like, I love it, let's do it. And that's how we got on the path to doing songs. And every cinematic after that, it was a little bit of like, we always came to this point where it's just like, do we want to do another song? Because if we do that, we're kind of starting to commit to this for this, you know, for this as branding for this IP. And you know, we'd go cook up another song, and they'd be like, damn it, it's good. Can I say that on this? But they would be like, it's good. All right, let's do it. And it's like, but the next one, we should probably switch it up. And it was like that for probably like until like maybe the 5th one or so, and they were like, I guess this is just it, you know, and then the fans just started to expect it. So that's how it started. And that's how I lost my fear to pitch anything. Like I can stand in front of any room now.
And it's all your fault as well. And you know, it's kind of moved on from that sort of thing recently into like the year-long kind of narrative of the Year of the Dragon stuff. Were you involved with that as well?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I got to do that year as well. Brian actually started that year off with the League of Evil.
Yeah, we kind of did a handoff. So I had been doing a couple years of Hearthstone stuff, and then they had this idea that they wanted these recurring characters to interact, and they were going to have an arc that went over the whole year of expansions and stuff. And so one thing we wanted to do was key players, like most players recognized the League of Explorers from a piece that JJ had done that was really successful. And so everyone knew sort of who the heroes were going to be. But what we had to do was introduce who the villains were to players. And so we did these little quick teasers, and we had very few paintings to work with. So we tried to be really clever about how we showed stuff and how we introduced each character. And then so that kind of teed it up. And then JJ and I we did I think the first tease to the whole thing together or something. We kind of did a handoff on one of them, and then JJ just ran with it after that.
Yeah, I think you did the first one, or you did some teasers. Yeah, it's a bit blurry. There's so many, like Hearthstone goes so fast. And just want to clarify something. So on the original League of Explorers cinematic, I helped write the song for that, but James McCoy directed that one. I was transitioning on to a different show at the time. But this whole year of Evil was super fun, because usually, you know, like I said, Hearthstone, we do something and then we make a like 90-degree turn and it's off to something different. This time, I mean, we still kind of got to do that, but we got to take these characters and the, you know, build in jokes that we would run with. For example, like in one cinematic, we shot a dart into Reno's butt, and then later on, fans noticed that, oh, he's still got the dart in his butt, you know, like little things like that. And a lot of those ideas just come from, you know, working with the motion story guys, where it's like, you know, around the office, I'm always like, hey, teamwork makes the dream work. I know it sounds cheesy, but like, I think for these motion story pieces specifically, I think it's all throughout Blizzard, but with these motion stories specifically, we're so collaborative with our illustrators, you know, with the motion story team, with our editors, directors. It really, with our sound team and musicians, like it really is like such a collaborative effort.
I guess kind of still talking about Hearthstone. Anna, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the latest Hearthstone piece that's come out, and kind of how that came about, because that has a really kind of unique and playful style.
Oh yeah, I mean, when the team came to us and was like, "We're gonna Darkmoon Fair," I was like, "You're doing what?" Like, I was ready. Like, let's do this thing, because I feel like I played WoW since vanilla, and you know, I tried to gather all the cards and seeing the fair like come every month and come to life, like it was really special to me. And I knew that I wanted to do the fair song, like writing on the carousel. It was like, we need to put words to this. And Christy Golden was my writer on the show, or lyricist. And we were right on the same page from the get-go. And I remember she knocked on my door and she's like, "Anna, I've been struck by the muse." And I was like, "Let's hear it, Christy." And, you know, she sang the words that are it was pretty close to final, really, just a few little tweaks. And I was just like, okay, we already have magic, because if you've gone to the fair and you've ridden the carousel, you know this song pretty well. And working with the composer from then, Adam Gubman, he added that little like swank to it, which I was like, oh yeah, like Hearthstone to me is always tied to music because of JJ and Brian and all the work that the directors have done. And so I wanted to make a music box. I wanted it, and then it became like, Matthew, help, because I want this music box to come alive. I wanted like it to be like a small world. JJ had done this really cool short before. It had like a puppet show, and I was like, maybe we can make like the spiritual successor. It's Darkmoon Faire has all the vibes of Danny Elfman and Tim Burton and Willy Wonka and all that kind of like, it's just slightly creepy enough to weird you out, but you're just like, I can't look away. This is awesome. More stripes. That's what I wanted. And so I went to Matthew and I was like, Matthew, I want this like to build and form and come alive. And he had these just really great ideas of how we could rotate creatures and pivot things and build the puppets so that we could get the amount of animation we needed, because the song was really quite long. It's one of the longest songs we've done. And since you're limited in how many paintings, how do you keep people's interest without full animation? Because we don't have that ability. It's painting, it's drawn, So that's kind of how the idea came to life. And, again, working with Matthew and John and the team, we really came up with these weird, kooky ideas and creatures and transitions and diving in and seeing the old god in the belly of the music box. And again, it's all like JJ laughs, but I do it. I say it now too because of him. Like teamwork, dreamwork, baby. Like it was so fun, and that one was just really special to me because of the amount of time that I've spent at the fair. So it was a good one.
It's my hands down favorite piece that I've seen you do, Anna, and you and the team do. I freaking love that cinematic.
Oh, that's awesome.
I love it so much.
Yeah, it was like, but when I say like thousands of layers, like Matthew, you can say like, I mean, it was some hard work.
It was
no joke.
Yeah, it was incredibly challenging for the artists, but it really was the perfect medium to portray that in. You've got these these cutout characters with the joint, the joints on their elbows and stuff like that, and we've done it a little bit before, but I definitely have to bow down to the artists, their animation skill, being able to get the idea of the stuttering, everything jiggles a little bit, so it's all like the whole thing is like almost about to fall apart during the whole, you're watching it going, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? And then the idea of stuff rotating and it, transforms into, with tentacles and stuff like that. Super, super fun process.
I know that as a World of Warcraft player, one of the great kind of thrills of the Hearthstone motion stories, at least at the beginning before they kind of carved their own niche so much, was seeing the Hearthstone take on sort of established Warcraft lore and characters and things like that. And so there was like this Hearthstone version of all of these things, which were a bit larger than life and a bit more colorful and just a different version of this thing that I loved. And it's actually really cool how the World of Warcraft motion stories have done the same thing. They've given us another version of the Warcraft universe as well, but very much maybe in another direction. And a great example of that again is Daughter of the Sea, which is kind of this seminal work for Warcraft fans, I know, when that sort of came out before the BFA expansion a couple of years ago. And Doug, we did touch on that a little bit in yesterday's panel as well. But since we're on the subject of music and these films, were you aware of wanting to kind of push the boundaries of what you've done with those Warcraft stories before, or is it something that just came about completely naturally?
So absolutely. So by the time Daughter of the Sea had come around, I think I had directed 12 of these pieces already. So there's definitely a need in me to try and find something new about it each time I approach it, something new to perk up. So whenever Alex Afrasiabi came to the story team meeting and kind of pitched us on what he needed for Jaina, and kind of left us with this idea of we need to take all this massive journey that she's been on and compress it down to 3 minutes. It's like, what do you do with that? She's been through so much that it's staggering to think about the emotional highs and lows of her life by that point. So I think going home over the weekend and thinking about it a bit, I started thinking about things like, who was it, Mary or Pippin, who was singing the song? You know, at one point, I think in the third Lord of the Rings film, to the bad guy, you know, and it started making me think in terms of like, man, you can get so much across emotionally in a song that maybe you just really can't do, especially in 3 minutes. So I came back from that weekend and actually kind of pitched the room, and actually thought I was going to get laughed out of the room for pitching the idea of doing something like a dirge, like some sort of funeral song or something like that, that could kind of encapsulate that journey. And nobody laughed me out of the room, which was great. And then the other thing is Taryn just kind of added to that and saying, well, you know, what if it's a warning? You know, it's not just a dirge, it's a warning about the daughter of the sea, that kind of a thing.
Why this, oh daughter of the sea? Why this, did she forget her seaside days?
So I think it just kind of snowballed from there. And then in terms of like just the addictive quality of the song, you really have to ask Anna Morgan up there. She was my editor on the piece, but Anna is this Swiss Army knife of skills. So basically, this is my first time I'm ever working with Anna. Huge fan of her work from before, but I'd never had a chance to work with her. And I came to Anna and basically said, this is the kind of thing I want to do, but I've never done a song before. You know, so I need your help. And she mentioned right away a fellow named Logan LaFlotte. Is that right, Anna?
Oh yeah. So so like I have this like little group I call the Blizzard Country Bears, and it's all these people that can sing. And you know, whenever we need to mock up a song, we kind of like get together. And Brian had actually used Logan in a couple of his Hearthstones that I had been the editor on, and you know, it's all like symbiotic. You know, we all kind of like, hey, you like music? Well, I like music. You like to sing? Well, let's sing. You like to make music? Sweet. Okay, let's do this. And, you know, then meanwhile, you hear JJ, he's like, I just wrote this jingle in the car on the way home. And you're like, you were driving? Like, what are you doing? But yeah, I remember Doug came up to me. He's like, we're doing a song. And I was like, awesome. And he's like, I'm like, when do we need to start? And he's like, yesterday. And I was like, okay, let's go talk to Logan, you know? And so we kind of had the weekend, and Logan wrote a song and I wrote a song. And then I heard Logan's song and I was like, oh, that's the one. Like really, really good. And so we pitched it, and then it became about, you know, how do we kind of make the song, mock it up so that we can get approval, because that's really what it's about. Doug like believed in it from the get-go, and so he really put all of his like weight and awesomeness behind it. And so then it was like Logan in my bay with his guitar, like, okay, let's change this. Oh yeah, we need to climax here. Let's get the Blizzard Country Bears in. There's JJ going like row, 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 you know, and Mike Kelleher is one of our CG soups, you know, and we're all singing together, and we kind of just built it in there in the bay. And then Doug would come in and he'd be like, okay, well, these are the visuals. This is what I want. And then we would try to bounce off of him. So it was super organic. It was really fun. And then you get Neil Acree, who is the composer, and then he takes it to 11. And you're just like, well, that was special.
And a super component at the beginning as well was Robert Brooks, who helped navigate the actual lore and turn it into words that would fit with music as well. Robert has a music background as well. So it really did take everybody bringing those to bear. And then basically I did some Post-it note thumbnails to really sell the idea in the room visually. Because like I mentioned yesterday to you guys, I come from that 2D artwork background, and my background is painting, and I love fine art and stuff like that. So once again, I just try and come up with images that I think are going to evoke a particular response, and things that are going to be kind of takeaway images. Like, what's your postcard of that journey? You know, what do I want to leave you with? And since we only have 30 images, you know, we have to be pretty responsible with the images we're gonna do.
It was striking how the three films in that series, the Warbringers, how different they all were, and what different purposes they served in the narrative, and why they even existed, really. But how strongly the themes kind of carried through the three of them. Were they conceptualized together with that in mind, or wasn't a happy accident, obviously?
I mean, a bit of it is a happy accident to some degree. I mean, we talked about, you know, Alex said, you know, we definitely want to do Jaina, and I think we want to do, I think at one point it was another character entirely, and I can't remember who now. Then it was Ashara, and then of course Sylvanas, you know, which was Mark's piece, which we talked about yesterday. And Mark had the unenviable job of trying to figure out how to burn down the Will Tree. And but yeah, so they were kind of loosely conceived together, but more as they developed more and more, I think it just became more natural as to what were each of these women after, essentially. So that, I think that just built its own theme over time, for sure. You know, I think originally we called that rebirth, the idea that these were phoenixes rising from the ashes in each situation, so to speak, and then eventually it changed to Warbringers, you know.
That's interesting. And again, the new series of the Warcraft stories serves a much more obvious purpose, maybe, as being sort of introductions to the four covenants that players will go to in Shadowlands. How did you approach those in a different way to the Warbringers, and before that the Lords of War and what have you?
So I think we did approach the new ones differently. We definitely set out with the express purpose of talking about the zones for the new expansion. So that was sort of a top line goal for them. What we find as storytellers is that it's kind of difficult to just talk about a place, right? Like emotion doesn't naturally flow from that. So what we worked really hard at was finding who would be sort of our eyes into that new world, right? So each of those pieces, we were able to find some character who we could hang the story on and get us a sense of what this place is all about, what drives this place and what the motivations are, but also through the eyes of that character, we get what we all want from a movie, which is an emotional journey for a character. So I know Mark Messenger, who's not here today, but he had done two of them. He did the Ardenweald and Revendreth. And I remember when he came up with the Revendreth piece, which is basically in the form of a letter being dictated by the ruler of this place, and the whole juxtaposition of, that everything is great is the message of the letter that he's dictating, but the images just betray everything he's saying. I thought, and with the lighthearted sort of classical music that's playing over top of it, I just thought that was a brilliant take on how to get into that world. We also, for those pieces, we also tried, what I think was important was to have characters that everyone knew from the Warcraft lore as well. So we kind of, in some, there's more of a cameo appearance, and in some, like the Maldraxxus one that I had directed, was a little more focused on a character that a lot of players would know from the lore, and allow them to see what their life is like now in the afterlife, right? So that's sort of how we approached those. But in terms of like the process, it was pretty much the same at that point. And we did 4 of those, and having to do 4 of those on the schedule we did, it's pretty taxing, and it's a heavy lift for the illustrators. So we were just really economical in how we were going to do it. And at this point, it's like, we know this is how we're going to do it. So we kind of just, fired up the machine and barreled forward. So
there was such wildly varying lengths, those 4 films as well. When you get a brief for one of these, do you have a kind of a length that you are briefed to kind of fill? And I guess then with the Bastion one, you go, well, this one needs to be a lot longer. And with the Revendreth one, you can sort of go, oh, okay, we can do this, and it's actually works much better if it's snappier and sort of that way.
Yeah.
Do you have that freedom?
I think what's interesting, like, because my background before coming to Blizzard was in television, and we were slaves to runtime. Like you just have to hit whatever act break before commercial, but at Blizzard and with stuff that we do online, that's not really the case. It can be whatever it needs to be. It's all about, is it holding attention? Is it the right amount to tell the story? And then budgetarily, like if we're doing something super complicated, it probably can't be very long. But if we're doing something super long, then we can find a way to tell that story, with fewer shots or less complication.
For example, for that Bastion piece, which is quite long, so Taryn, the director, had to be really creative about what drawings to use, right? We had to really economize. So there are a lot of drawings, but you'll see a lot of drawings being reused or used in different ways to get to that length. So it still feels like you're moving through the story. You're still seeing all the content you want to see. But, you know, that's part of that collaborative process of like, hey, this is the story we want to tell. Ultimately, you know, we want the story to be king. We want the story to be the thing that we serve. So then it becomes about how do we creatively work together to find a way to tell that story in the length that's appropriate, get all the pieces in there. Whereas like the snappier stories may actually have just as many drawings, but they happen more quickly. So it's an interesting process, and those four are quite different. It's quite interesting to watch them come together.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned kind of the drawings, because you know, I'm just thinking about how, yeah, you're working with this kind of limited number of them, but they are really, really striking. Like they're really kind of beautiful images. And I mean, I think we still have some of like the Ashara prints, like they're, you know, they're wall worthy, right? Like,
I might have them somewhere.
So yeah, so thinking about illustration, I guess what does it take to be an illustrator on one of these kinds of pieces?
Yeah, I think there's so many answers to that, but it is complex, and I think you want to convey something really quickly. You know, it depends on, like, if you're talking about something like Bastion or Maldraxxus or one of the WoW pieces, you know, you're talking about conveying usually like heavy emotional moments or action moments quite quickly. So it's maybe similar to comic book drawing, or you want that first read to be immediate. It's a quicker drawing. It's more gestural than like a polished illustration. And you know, some of the challenges I think for our illustrators on those projects are a lot of times we're conveying like internal things, like things that are not stated. So I remember like conversations about, we just want this character to feel more contemplative, or we want to convey some kind of like inner turmoil. Taryn as a director will often like convey things in like grunts, or he'll say like, you know, I just want like like, and you're trying to interpret that into something visual, you know, which is, we really rely on the talent of our team of illustrators who are exceptional, and artists like Laurel Austin who have really kind of pioneered that drawing style and kind of set the style for the WoW work. Where with the Hearthstone stuff, sometimes it's a similar challenge, but sometimes the challenge is, hey, we want to convey something funny immediately. We need a flex explosion, right? Like and you need to look at a drawing and laugh. It's different. It's a different kind of challenge, but it's an equal challenge. And I think that's part of the magic of it. It's part of the fun for the artists, is to convey these ideas. You know, our directors are so good. They really know the story they want to tell, and they know what they want the audience to feel when they see that drawing or when they look into that character's eyes. And so the challenge for our team is then to bring those characters to life in a visual way.
And also the thing I think you would want to be as an artist is super curious, right? So the thing as an illustrator you're generally asked to do is make something look awesome, make somebody look cool, make them stand proud and heroic and look at the camera and just be awesome. It's the X-Men or whatever it is. But Burdens of Shauhau or Lords of War, all these things are going to ask you to do Shakespearean plays. You're going to be asked to draw the moments that are not cool. They're going to be subtle moments where it's just a shot of a hand on the hilt of a sword or somebody looking sad, things that most illustrators don't have to grow up knowing how to do, or even really maybe even want to do. It is something that's more akin to comic books for sure. But I also think, you know, if you have that curiosity and you're wanting to jump into doing 2.5D stories, I would say look at animation, but also look at those, as Dennis said, it's almost like the extreme poses that you would see, your A and your B pose. You're not going to have a whole lot of this. You're going to either have this or that, you know, in the 2.5Ds. You're going to have the extremes and very little in betweens. And so just in general, I think the way we built 2.5D as a department with Matthew's work, with Anna, you know, coming in and building a song, it's just these people that are always curious and willing to try things and then take things up another notch, because you're definitely not going to get very far without those people on your side, as I'm sure JJ could tell you as well. You want people that are hungry to try things, to be silly and foolish and grand and big and broad, and then just get together and make a soup as best you can.
I'm very, very happy to define the difference between Warcraft and Hearthstone motion stories as being facial expressions versus flex explosions. I'm down
It's-
for that.
It's not untrue.
So you mentioned the importance of sort of curiosity and sort of and trust. Are there any other kind of attributes that you'd be looking for in artists to work in the motion story department, Matthew?
Oh, for the motion story department, we it's the one department within cinematics really that kind of, apart from actually creating the artwork, we take the finished artwork and we take it all the way through to the final product. So we take it all the way to final image. So from 2D image to 3D animated image. So there's definitely a need, and there's definitely a need for generalists in the department. So we're looking for people that can do a bit of everything. So and that's kind of counter to most cinematics departments too. So when I started in Blizzard so many years ago, there were only a handful of people in the department, and everyone really had to do a bit of everything. There weren't enough people to handle specific tasks. And as time went on, everyone kind of found their niches and their specialities, whether it be animation or modeling or finalizing the shots in lighting or effects even. And so that's kind of the development of a cinematics department, is kind of like compartmentalizing everyone into their specialities. And I was always kind of a generalist. I like doing a bit of everything. And so that's exactly what I look for in my artist. So if we take a shot, we're looking for someone who can do a little bit of modeling, a little bit of animation, a little bit of effects, a little bit of finishing, a little bit of a little bit of everything. Maybe some rigging of skeletons on the characters, maybe some hair simulations, maybe some cloth simulations. And so we're kind of the one spot in cinematics where if you're kind of like good at everything, then we really want you to join in, to dive in. Even camera work too. There's an eye for that. There's an eye for composition and for camera work. And so with the one thing too is that these shots they're quick. They're, for example, with Shadowlands pieces, they were from getting your piece of artwork, you had to come up with a final shot within the turnarounds were, I think, 1 to 3 days. So total, that's how long an artist gets to work on these shots. So you need to be self-sufficient. You need to be kind of problem solving on the fly. So the people that I work with, they're self-sufficient, but they also know how to collaborate with everyone too. So if they're coming across, you really can't get stuck on anything for too long. If you you have to reach out to your teammates and say, hey, how do I fix this problem? And they all help each other, but also there's a lot of reuse as well. So it's like, oh no, I remember in that old project where I did a similar thing. So let's recycle that too. So it's a very much the people I work with are very much multi-talented. And also on top of that, in our team, we have a technical artist, Kathy, who we really couldn't work without her too. She does the programming, creating scripts and programs that really give us shortcuts for everything. So if there's anything that we tend to do a lot and repetitively, if it can be done with a program and the press of a button, she is there for us, and she'll say, oh, I can turn that into a button. So it's just like, oh, let's have the make awesome button. Boop. Okay, hey, you made it awesome. So it's really that collaboration between everyone. And we have the nice thing too is we have direct contact, direct feedback with the directors as well. So it really is a lot of fun, the whole process. But we are looking for the people, even people with a bit of fine art background, because they're using Photoshop, they're using Maya for the 3D aspects, and they're using Nuke for the compositing process. So everyone needs to know a bit of everything. So, and in this day and age, it's we really have to kind of look for them carefully, because people do tend to specialize in one thing or another.
So the main attribute you're looking for is be good at everything.
Yes.
Easy.
Be supremely
Yeah.
awesome.
Simple.
Yeah.
And explains the awesome collection of people we have here, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
So,
Yes.
and on that subject, one thing I really enjoyed from yesterday's panel was hearing the contributors talk about each other's work. It's always nice to hear your insights on your own work. But I was wondering if within this pool of like vastly varied and different talent that we have on this screen now, if you would be able to share your favorite 2.5D cinematic directed by one of our present colleagues here. This might be like when you're at a party and you can't remember the name of the person that you're talking to, and then when someone else comes along, you don't want to introduce anyone because then you'd have to admit that you don't know the name. But I'm sure that's not the case. I'm sure you're all like intimately familiar with all the different cinematics and work.
Well, we know Jeremiah's favorite, right? Already,
Oh,
you've already shared that one.
Madness at the Dark Moon Fair for Anna. Since I'll just rattle them off, my top picks. So that one for Anna is my favorite. For Doug, it's the Ajara piece. Like, see, with the fish flopping around, like that whole concept and how that was executed. Like, I just love that piece. The Jaina piece it's really close to it, but that's probably my favorite one from Doug. And from Brian. And Brian, if you didn't direct this one, I've got a second one that I know you directed.
You're doing exactly what. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
But the Kobolds and Catacombs piece, that was you, right?
Yeah.
Dude, I absolutely love that like little dungeon run and the song that goes with it. I adore that one. So those would be my 3 picks for these 3 supremely talented people.
Awesome.
Nice.
I would like to say Jeremiah has gone above and beyond there. I don't expect multiple answers. Like, you can just one each.
Oh.
No, only because I don't want to put people under pressure to be as on it as you are. That's all. Brian, what do you reckon?
Yeah, it's actually pretty easy to do that, actually, because for Anna, yeah, for sure, it's the Dark Moon Fair piece. For JJ, it's definitely the Sigma piece for me. I just feel like that's a wildly creative problem solving, but also like the piece is great also. So I really love that. And then for Doug, yeah, that's a tough one, because Doug and I have worked on so many of them together, and there's so many of them that I love. Like the one we did for StarCraft, I think was really great. And then again, but yeah, Ashara and the dirge for Jaina is just really like, all of those are pieces where it's like, man, I wish I could do that. So that's sort of where I come at for all those pieces.
It sounds like you were the only person in Blizzard who wasn't involved in Dirge and Jaina, in fairness. Like, you just weren't walking through the car park that day and you get roped into the song.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, it was more like, Doug, you need to talk to these people. That was my part.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting. The first 2.5D piece I got to work on with Brian is Maldraxxus, and I loved that process. I love that piece. I love how it turned out. That was super fun. He's got a long catalog to choose from, but that's the one I go with. I'm going to go out of the box for Anna because Dark Moon Fair is amazing, but I'm going to say Skullomance Wizard Duels. I don't even know if it counts, but it's so...
It counts! It's awesome! If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's freaking awesome. That's my number 2 pick.
I've seen it hundreds of times. I don't know how many times we watched it in every form. And it makes me laugh out loud every time. So that's way up there for me. Sigma for JJ, I just think it's groundbreaking. There's something, it's spectacular. And knowing the sort of creative restrictions around it, I think just makes it better to me, because you wouldn't know that when you watch it. You would just be like, wow, this is brilliant. So it's fantastic. And for Doug, I have to say Jaina, because there are like visually, we paint everything the same size, but there are some illustrations and some visuals and images that are bigger than others. Like just the scope of that piece and how big it feels. Like that piece feels like it should be watched in a theater. And it's just, there's a feel you get watching that piece that is just stunning. So those are mine.
Awesome. Yeah, I have to agree with all of those. With motion story, it's always about the pushing the boundaries, and all of those ones that everyone's mentioned so far just push the boundaries of motion story. But I think on top of that, I'd like to add the marionette puppet show that we did for Hearthstone, just because I have this affinity growing up in England with the Jerry Anderson puppets and stuff like that, string puppets. Every time can we put puppets in there somewhere? And then all of a sudden, yes, we can put puppets in there. So it was just, yeah, it was genius.
Quick story, because Matthew's selling or playing that little story right there. This was the end of the year. We had worked towards the end of the year of the year-long narrative. The team had worked so hard. We had done so many more cinematics in that year than we had ever done before for Hearthstone, in addition to every other workload for all the other IPs. And I had this idea of like, oh, we can maybe reuse some art. And like, I kind of wanted to give the team an easy one. And the motion story guys were like, nah, it's got to be puppets. And I was like, that's going to be so much harder. And they're like, we want puppets. And it's like, all right, let's do it. And they just knocked it out of the park. So
that has a place in my heart for sure. Awesome.
I don't want. Did everyone go? I don't want to go last.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, I'll make you go last. So for Doug, for me, I don't remember what Lords of War, but it's the one where the fingernail comes off.
Yeah.
Anytime you can get a reaction like that much out of me, it's like, ooh.
It was Kargath.
Kargath, so good. I was like, oh, we can do like this hardcore stuff, because I like a lot of horror things too. Me and Doug are very similar that way. So I was like, oh, that was
By the way, we chopped a head off in that piece, but the thing that bothered people more than that head coming off was that fingernail getting peeled off.
Oh, so good. Like, oh, awful great. And then I don't know, I've been an editor for a lot of these guys on a lot of stuff. So, but for Brian, I still wake up in the morning with Dr. Boom in my head and I go, science, you can grow into success. Like that one was so catchy. That jingle was so good.
Science!
You can grow into success with no regrets when you work with Dr. Boom.
And then I think JJ's my favorite one was Savior of Old Doom, because we'll perform for each other, and he'll always like come in and be like, hey, Anna, what do you think of this? And his like dance moves for that, and when he pitched it to me, like dinos are rising again.
Shadows are rising again, darker than they've ever been.
I was just like, yes, this is already a 10. Like, so those are my picks for sure.
The Warcraft images do have those very loose brush strokes and that kind of undefined edges a lot of the time. Does that come with its own sort of challenges to animate as opposed to something with much more defined lines?
I think it's in some ways it's easier that it's got these backgrounds that are kind of nebulous and very artistic. It's like part of a painting, and so but I think as far as animating them, I think she's always been incredible as far as the way she splits up her artwork and creates it. And I think everyone really enjoys working with it. And I think, like I said before, it's that it inspires the artist. Like you can feel the emotion that's in the painting. And so it actually helps the artist who's working on it, the motion story artist, become more creative. So I think it's it definitely helps with the process, having this incredible artwork to work with.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I think with the rough brush strokes and with that style, like sometimes there will be, it's really to convey energy, and sometimes there'll be even like splashes of ink suggested in there. And what's interesting is as we go and we translate that 2D artwork into a shot that's supposed to be in 3D, there will be instances where it's like, wait, is that supposed to be dust or what is that? What, like, how far into the frame is that? What layer should we put it on? So there's some like, you know, math involved. Sometimes there'll be a wild brushstroke where it's like, I love the energy, but we gotta like cut that. Let's just cut that part out because it's really confusing the shot and stuff like that. So some of that happens along the way in the process.
Yeah, with the process that we go through when we have the director and the artists review the work, it's usually the artist is, or always the artist is always there too. And so they always have an idea of what they imagine that to be. And so we'll get that feedback as well, which is super, super, you know, it's just like, oh, okay, you imagined that to be, you know, sparks or dust, or I thought it was something completely different. So it's just like, okay. So there's this moment of discovery too in reviews where we just go, okay, I can do that. That's awesome. So, or there's also in the reverse too of the artist looking at going, I never imagined it would be like that, but that's cool. Let's go with it. So there's also that kind of to and fro as well. So it's a super interesting process, the review process, when it starts to turn into 3D.
I think what's interesting about that style too is that as the projects have grown and scaled, then there is this kind of established style for those shows that can't be done by one artist. And so what you're seeing is hundreds of illustrations that are meant to look like they were done by the same person now. And it's made it quite challenging to scale, but I think it's been such an inspiration, and there's so much passion for that. Like there's so much excitement about kind of what has been set as this look, that there's like a lot of excitement and energy put toward maintaining that. And I think it's been really successful to this point.
Yeah, to that point, we've mentioned Laurel's name several times, but they haven't all been done just by Laurel, and that should definitely be called out. We have people that do layout. You know, I did the layout for a lot of the earlier stuff that Laurel and I collaborated on, but then on the Hearthstone side of things, you have people like Lulavi, who's actually doing the layouts for the artists. So that way, the actual artists themselves can just think about painting the illustration. They don't have to think about how it's going to match up with the following shot and things of that nature. So it's kind of, the layout artist for us is kind of doing the storyboard job to some degree, or at least the step between storyboards and final illustration. And then you'll have people like Jake Panian, who actually came in and painted on the Sylvanas piece, as well as he actually did the Gul'dan piece with us. And we've had a lot of extra help over the years getting these pieces made, but at the end of the day, it does have to be somebody that comes in, like Sam Nielsen on a lot of the Hearthstone pieces, and he kind of brings them all together. He harmonizes them all. So you do have to have that person, and that's what Laurel wound up doing in a lot of these situations. Is she would either do an episode by herself, or she would get these assists from all these great artists in the illustration crew, and then she would kind of marry it all together and get it to the finish line for us.
The Jameson Warbringer is something that made us kind of start paying much more attention to Blizzard cinematics in general, and the way that they could be talked about and the way that they could be appreciated, which is something that we've then found we could apply to any Blizzard cinematic since. And the motion stories are kind of a high watermark of that in the depth that you can get in them, and the amount that you can talk about them, and the amount that there is to appreciate in them.
There was no mistake that the 2.5D basically, I think, led a lot of Blizzard's storytelling for years to come, in terms of maybe the a little more emotionally deep storytelling that I think we all wanted to do as storytellers all around Blizzard. And I think it became that safe pocket where we could experiment and do things that may be a little out of the box of what might be an announced cinematic that would be bombastic and everything else. You would have never had a Jaina, you know, without, you know, the Shahau stuff that we did at the beginning, or Hearthstone at the beginning. It was just a format that I think allowed us to flex. And I think that's what Metzen saw at the very beginning when it started, and why he kind of protected its growth, at least on our side of the street. And I think that's what Jeff Chamberlain was doing on the other side of the street, because there was these two different departments kind of working in tandem without knowing what the other was doing to a large degree. But I think it really has become the place where we allowed ourselves to flex. And then that turned into Old Soldier, for instance. Like, I don't know if you would have had an Old Soldier without, you know, some of the earlier things where we'd gotten a chance to tell these stories that were maybe a little risky, you know, for us before.
And I guess it's such a mainstay now that I would imagine that any new kind of property that kind of pops up is automatically going to get motion stories fixed to them. Like, obviously, I can't ask this, but would you be surprised if some Diablo 4 motion stories popped up at some point?
Would we be surprised?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. But I know at least with everything in Diablo 3, we've sort of set that up as a Diablo thing, right? With these like sketched parchment things. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that there's a place for motion story on every IP, even from now into the future. It's just a matter of maybe how much or what it's intended to do.
Yeah, that's kind of the wonderful thing about it too, is it's really the style of the artwork that, that brings the emotion. And so every IP that we've worked on has had, super varying, styles of artwork and levels of detail, but they still tell the stories of what, of the characters involved. So I look forward to whatever projects we come up with and whatever art styles we have to work with. So it's always super exciting to come up with, see something new, see a piece of artwork and see what that inspires in us.
Yeah, and we are super excited to see whatever you all come up with next, whether it's the kind of, contemplative inner world, like evocative images of Warcraft, or, Hearthstone, which is always going to make me laugh out loud. So yeah, there's this power in all of these motion stories, like you've all said, just to conjure up emotions brilliantly. So yeah.
And in their own unique way as well,
Yeah.
which I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
But, guys, thank you so much for your
Thank
insights into your process and how these things are made today. I've learned a lot. I feel like I could go away and I couldn't obviously go away and make one of these, but I've got a lot more understanding of what goes into it now. Thank you.
Thanks for the time.
You are very
thanks,
welcome.
everybody. That was
Thank you
awesome.
so much for having us.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
brilliant.